victory and the agony of defeat.
Madison, great ball around the corner, Penasini, he beats them all! Junior Polar out wide, knocked away from Trindle, Sharks coming through, none of them can hold him!
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Tip Sheet Podcast. As always, I'm your host, John, also known as Footy20, and joining me that way, there we go, reverse angles on the camera is my good mate, Sixties. Big fella, a pleasure to have you back on board as always and I suppose it's a bit of an expanded preview podcast this week. No NRL, but that means we have a chance to combine the junior reps and then the Jersey Flag and the New South Wales Cup together, as well as talk about some important rep news for the NRLW. So as always, before we get into the show, quick check-in on how you doing, mate. And we've had a bit of all seasons at the moment. I had the rain pouring down earlier, and now it's all sunny and summery.
Yeah, and I don't know whether it's just me, but it certainly feels a little bit humid even at the moment.
Yeah, I've got the hoodie on, but it's probably going to come off after the show.
Mate, yeah, look, doing really well. Yeah, one of the great things about living in the Parramatta district as well is even trips up to the local shopping centre involve people stopping me to talk about Parramatta. And it's, and I think as people have realised, there's never a time really when I don't want to talk about Parramatta. So that's we'll call that a life's affliction, mate. Yeah, look, and before we go on, of course, a shout out to our sponsors, star partners, Real Estate, Auburn, Narellan and Parramatta, and also to Parramatta Leagues Club, the home of the Eels. They're great supporters of Junior Rugby League in the Parramatta District, and also our coverage of Junior Rugby League in the Parramatta District. And given that this is a combined Junior Reps preview, lower grades preview, always important to acknowledge the generosity of Parramatta Leagues Club in making it so affordable for junior players to play the game they love in the Parramatta District. Also, no matter what platform that you're listening or watching this on, if you can give it a like and subscribe, that would be fantastic. And also, just to mention our Patreon, if people would like to support us for $5 a month, that would be fantastic. We've got the links on all of our website articles. So if you'd like to be a Patreon, just click onto that. It's a great way to support what we do because, every little bit helps us to keep bringing you the content. So, and also to the people who are already Patreons supporting us, we really do appreciate that. And we're just working on a few things around that. So stay tuned. We're probably going to look at bringing in some levels and acknowledgement of the people who support us as well. So stand by with news in that regard. So, John, I guess without any further ado, let's get into the news that you talked about earlier, because we do have some terrific news that came out literally the day after our news podcast.
Classic tip sheet form.
Usually the way. Yep. It's typical. People who follow us closely know that no matter what day we put out the news podcast, even though it's regularly on a Tuesday, even when we've mixed the days up during the pre-season, big news always lands the day after. If we go on a Tuesday, it lands on a Wednesday. If we go on a Wednesday, it comes out on Thursday. If we go on a Thursday, it comes out on a Friday. So there is big news for the Eels NRLW players.
Yeah, coming on the back of their big year where they didn't make the final 60s, but they won a lot of admirers for how they played the game under Steve Georgioulis. We've had 3 Eels selected into the State of Origin teams, 2 for the Blues, 1 for the Maroons. Abbi Church leading the way after her Dally M Fullback of the Year campaign and also coming runner-up in the overall gong. She gets selection for the Blues alongside Kennedy Cherrington, who returns from what was injury at the time, 60s, and she missed out on the last State of Origin series on the back of that. And then opposing them in the Queensland side is the breakout rookie star for the Parramatta Eels, who didn't get Rookie of the Year honours because of that technicality that we spoke about in the past, coming from a rugby union background. But Rory Owen, deserved selection there for the Queensland Maroons after her incredible rookie year for the Parramatta Eels. So their first game's taking place on Wednesday, May 1, up in Suncorp, 60s. And it's going to be must-watch TV just for the actual state of the game itself. And this has been a real calendar marker game for a number of years now, 60s. But the fact that we've got 3 very talented Eels in this game and they're opposing each other as well adds a lot of spice to this game for the Blue and Gold.
Yeah, look, it's a great acknowledgement of the seasons that were had, especially by Abbi and Rory. Kennedy, we know what Kennedy brings. She's
been a staple of the rep teams for a number of years too, until injury interrupted it.
Yeah, absolutely. So without that, I mean, who knows the impact that her injury had on the Eels' prospects last year, but certainly, as you said, she's been a staple of the Blues team. She's passionate about playing for New South Wales, and so she's really a seasoned performer at a young age, but a seasoned performer in the Origin arena. And now we've got a couple of younger players that have come through, and as you said, both of them had outstanding years last year. And we certainly we knew Abby's consistency even prior to last year, but she probably went up another notch. And Rory Owen was just
revelation.
An absolute revelation. The just to adapt to the game so quickly, and not just with having a rugby union background and adapting to rugby league so quickly, but adapting to the NRL standards so quickly, to the point where she was a standout player.
And what set her apart, at least in my mind, 60s, is that a lot of these rugby union recruits have come from that Sevens background, playing for Australia, Commonwealth Games, the Sevens circuit, high-level stuff. Rory was a club-level rugby player, if I'm not mistaken, in the 60s. And she's come into the NRL system, NRLW system, and like you said, the way she's taken to it, it was very, very impressive. A natural.
It's like rugby league. It was like rugby league was her natural game.
Yeah, exactly. You would have thought that she'd come from rugby league pathway. So a huge find for the Parramatta Eels, expecting big things from her later this year. And the club do note that following their Origin commitments, Cherrington, Church and Owen will rejoin the Eels for their pre-season training underneath Steve Georgalis in his second year as head coach. And they do say it's gearing up to be an exciting 2025 campaign, and I cannot agree more. We've got a couple of big additions in Mattielli and Paige Travis, Martha Mattielli and Paige there, and we've got some young players coming through too that's going to make this a very, very exciting campaign for the Parramatta Eels. So NRLW coverage will begin obviously in the short future, and we really look forward to that, 60s. But in the meantime, we've got 5 games to preview, so let's rep into it, mate. And it's a trio of grand final qualifiers for the Parramatta Eels in the junior representative systems. The Lisa Fiaola, the Tarsha, Gale, and the SG Ball Cup are all in action this weekend. And we'll start with the ladies who play out. They play out in the. Look, I'm not going to call it the Sticks, but out past Glenmore at the Oaks, and they've got a double header against the Bulldogs, a double header against the Panthers last week, into a double header against the Dogs this week. A lot of Western Sydney rivals coming up in those Fiaola and Cup games, and we'll start with the Lisa Fiaola, the under-17s, and they kick off at 10 o'clock a.m. Dudley Chesham Sports Ground at the Oaks. And, of course, you can catch us on Bar TV and TCT for your video and reading coverage. And the Eels come off a very solid win against the Penrith Panthers. They've got Ray Sevilla at fullback, Sienna Bonello and Freedom Crichton Rapati on the wings, Georgia Wanzi and Cody Tuamasevi in the centres. Sienna and Georgia are on the left, Cody and Freedom are on the right. You got Sharon Latapu and Tamika Withers in the halves, 60s. Alongside a front row that looks like this with Meadow Sivo, Isabella Bell, the bookends, and then the dynamic Ballymar Chong at dummy half. On the edges, on the right side, Kaysen Morgan Pritchard, one of the Eels' best last week, will be down the right with the aforementioned Cody and Freedom. And then with Mitzi Cairns on the left, at lock forward, you've got Katia Duff. On the interchange, Alicia Meza, Olivia Saba, Evelyn Kuendu, and Kavinia O'Callaghan Ahio. Extended roster, Deja Vivella, Halo Talangi, and Hine Rakiti. and we don't get officials for this one, I don't believe, but kicking off at 10 o'clock p.m., taking on the Dogs who you've...
10 a.m., John, a.m.
Did I say p.m.?
Yeah.
Oh, well, I swear I said 10 a.m. Sorry, 10 a.m. This isn't a Perth game. So taking on the Dogs who they did meet a couple of weeks ago in round 9, and the Dogs unfortunately put them through the ringer 60s, 46-10. And after that game, you mentioned how impressive that Canterbury lineup was and how you thought they might be able to take on Tarsha Gale lineups, players 1 to 2 years older in those age brackets. What has changed for the Eels in those following 2 to 3 weeks, and how can they go about being competitive with what is pretty clearly the competition benchmark in the Belmore girls?
John, just to give that a bit of context as well, with the Bulldogs, they won their match in the first week of the final series. So bear in mind they were playing the 4th place team, 58-10.
Close game, eh?
Yeah, it's pretty much what we've seen all through the season proper. And they're big, they're skillful. I referred to them as basically a New Zealand invitational team.
Yeah,
because they've imported a lot of players into their lineups, because the Canterbury district doesn't really have a huge number of junior teams, and I don't know, whether they've got too much of a female competition there to speak of. So when the Bulldogs see themselves as a development club, they use their pathways as their development areas. It was interesting to see Seraldo talk about that and talk about their systems there. He obviously wasn't talking about the current Bulldogs team with that he was talking about the future, because the current Bulldogs team is pretty much all been recruited from external sources. A lot of players that made their NRL debut at other clubs, very few that had come through the pathways. They probably celebrated a debut or two of players that have come through the pathways, but their girls' teams are prime examples of the fact that they will scout far and wide for players to put into their systems. This is a team which, as you alluded to there, John, after I watched them play their matches against their match against the Eels at the end of the regular season, and then saw the Tarsha Gale team lose to the Eels, I declared that I thought that the Lisa Fiaola Dogs team would probably give the Tarsha Gale Dogs team a decent contest. If, like I said, maybe they beat them. Maybe that 2 years age difference for some of them might make that a little bit of a bold statement. Maybe the Gale team would still get the better of them, but I'll tell you what, they would be a competitive team, a very competitive team, if they just transplanted them into the Tarsha Gale competition. I think we know that they would probably make the finals of Tarsha Gale as 16 and 17-year-olds, such as their size and their skill level. So, John, what do the Eels have to do? Well, we've seen glimpses of the Eels' best football. Even in that game where they lost, they had moments where they were making it a little bit difficult for the Bulldogs team. If you got to keep possession, you got to move them around a bit, because they are a bigger team. So the way that I see it is, when the Eels lost in the first week of the finals to the Central Coast Roosters, they let the Roosters jump out to that big lead. And then what the Eels did in the second half was they started to play a lot more direct. There was a lot of runners digging back in behind the ruck, there was the forwards would playing a real up-tempo, drive it through the middle sort of game, and they were well and truly on top of the Roosters. It was literally, they couldn't quite convert the chances that they had, but they did still score 3 second-half tries to make it look more like a finals scoreline in the end. Last week against the Panthers, it was a very stop-start game. A lot of penalties were blown during that game, a few errors as well. But again, we saw that when the Eels played directly, that they caused problems for the Panthers. When they got that up-tempo game going, they caused troubles for the Panthers. So I think they've really got to look at that. The tempo that they play at, minimise errors, keep driving in through the forwards, make them work harder. And I think if they can introduce some fatigue into the Bulldogs team, then they can make it a real contest in this game. And because it's finals football, you never know what to expect. I mean, the Bulldogs, they haven't been tested really on that scoreboard at all this season. If all of a sudden there's a team going with them, you don't know what pressure might do to them, because they haven't faced real pressure this season.
Yep. Yeah, adversity is always important for these young teams, and when you don't face it and for a long period and it suddenly rears its ugly head, they can get rattled. And I think that's going to be the key, 60s, is making sure you stay in the contest. And I'm going to frame my argument here under the basis that the Eels are fairly rank outsiders. You're not going to sugarcoat this one. The Dogs are heavy favourites here. But like you said, it's sports. Any given Saturday or any given Sunday, as the saying goes, but a Saturday in this case, given that they're playing out at 10 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday, it's just 60 minutes of football where you can just press an advantage, be disruptive, and do the ambush. And for the Eels, I think obviously the forward pack needs to aim up, but a lot of pressure is going to be on the spine, particularly Latapu Withers and Bailey Marchong, who are the kicking exponents for the team. Sevilla doesn't kick for the Eels as a fullback, and they're going to have to be able to turn that big pack around, find the carpet, and sort of minimise the danger of the back three making their kick returns too. And it's going to be a difficult task, but that's going to be a key part of the plan for the Parramatta Eels, is flipping the field position. Like you said, 60s, forward pack has to match the physicality. The back line and the edge defense has to be willing to really be desperate, because the Dogs are going to shift the ball around. They're going to try and punch it through the middle. They're going to do the contrasting things there, where pulling in numbers through the middle and then shifting it wide with speed and finesse. And the Eels have to match them on both accounts, even though they're contrasting play styles. And yeah, they've then got to find the big spots. I think you're not going to get the cheap tries against the Dogs. That's probably where I was going with that one. There's not going to be any freebies, or it's unlikely to be freebies. You might get one, who knows. But you're going to be looking to your spot players, to your big moment players like Freedom Crichton Rapati, Bailey Marchong around the middle. Kaiser Morgan Pritchard's been very good in that regard lately, 60s. She's created some big plays for the Eels. And then off the interchange, I think Alicia Mees has been really nice as that ball-playing middle. I know that she's sort of there as a dummy half / like middle forward utility. And I thought she had a really nice ball to Evelyn Kawendu last week that got the Eels back in the contest there. And yeah, it's going to be such a combined arms effort here for the girls. They're going to have to find multiple players, perhaps the majority of the lineup making big plays, because that's how good this Bulldogs lineup is.
Yeah. John, I want our spine to be at their best in terms of their decisiveness.
Yeah,
like
no hesitation.
No hesitations. They have to just back the game plan, back themselves. The forwards, that line speed is going to have to be great all game. Yeah, as you mentioned, they got to shut down plays before they evolve from the Bulldogs. Once the Bulldogs get any sort of galloping room between where they receive the ball and where they're met by the defence, they'll start to get that. They'll get to that situation where the defence is just on the back foot and are literally retreating as they're trying to defend, and they can't let it get to that stage, because that's really what happened in that first half against the Bulldogs up at Kellyville a few weeks back. The Bulldogs, there's stats that are done, and I don't think they're not done at this level, but I have seen them done at the NRL level with the amount of meters made before the first defender comes in contact with the ball runner, and theirs would have been averaging around the 10-meter mark,
which is huge
in that week, which would be huge. You probably want it to be around that 6-meter mark, no more than that, because you want that line speed coming up to meet them. So that's about all we could say in this game, John. I'm not going to make a prediction because it's, as you said, the Eels come into this game as rank outsiders, and I want to just simply watch it unfold where they put the Bulldogs under more pressure than they've ever been, facing during this season. And let's just see how it unfolds with a bit of pressure.
Yeah, look, again, the Dogs heavy favourites here. Not to say the Eels can't get the ambush or the surprise victory pulled off, but they're going to have to play one hell of a game. And then my concern from there would be how emotionally and physically drained would they be coming out of that victory, that hypothetical victory, heading into the grand final, which would be a beast unto itself. So let's just, like you said, enjoy the game, 60s, and hope that they can play a very competitive brand of football and ask some serious questions of the competition favourites.
Yeah, absolutely, which now brings us to the Tarsha Gale Cup match, which follows directly on from that, again out at the Oaks. I'm still stunned at the issue with the venues.
The venues in this final series have either been completely random, benefiting no one, or home field advantage for a certain team. And it is absolutely bizarre, with lower seeds getting home field or higher seeds, but like only part of the contest, like of the block of games getting home field. I don't know. Anyway, 11:30 a.m. 60s is the Tarsha Gale kickoff here. Same ground as you mentioned, the Oaks, which is a Dudley Chesham sports ground to be specific. Again, Bar TV and TCT, your major outlets here for coverage of the game. Eels coming off a win against the Panthers, like their Lisa Fiaola sisters in the lower grade there. But they're taking on a Dogs team that they actually managed to beat, and we'll get to that shortly. The roster looking like this for the grand final qualifier. Fullback is Dallas Graham Wivel. On the left edge, you got Suala Lafonga on the wing. And then right sideline has Avina Rakomengata running that edge. Elias Scrivens and Maria Fasavalu Farmasuli are in the centres. I believe Maria plays on the right edge. Just recalling that game against, not last week, but the week before, because Maria didn't play last week, did she, 60s?
I don't know. I had it in my head that she did, but don't.
Let me. I'll look at that in a short moment. But
no, I'm actually bringing the.
Okay, I'll keep going while you look at that. But because I remember her game the week before out at Leichhardt where she got into a couple of fiery.
No, you're right, because Sammy Lee Gunn.
That's right,
Tawai.
Yeah.
So she was playing in centres.
Maria had a very physical running skirmish with some opposition players in that week before, so she might have picked up a one-game suspension, I dare say, based on that, unless maybe Sammy Lee's injured as well because she's not in the extended team too. So a change in the backline regardless, with Fasavalu Farmasuli coming into the centres. Moving into the halves though, you've got Kylia Gray and Aaliyah Sufan as the 5'8" and halfback respectively. Front row sees Tess McWilliams in the 10 and Taylor Falanico on the 16 starting, as someone hoons down my back street there, as you can hear. Ava Jones is the dummy half. In the back row, you've got Fontaine Tafua and Matoshi Kalepo, with Rivoli Arlo rounding out what has been their premier trio of back rowers, their 60s. On the interchange then, Armani Lee Avae, Rory Muir as the interchange dummy half, Lilia Tapuli, try scorer last week with the match-sealing try, and then Alana O'Loughlin as the final rotation forward. Shia Tokulich.
I really like that step off the left foot that
Lilietta had. Yeah, it was nice near the goal lines. Yeah, against that fatiguing defense, it was good lateral movement. But yeah, rounding out the team 60s, Shia Tokulich and Anahira Payakau, taking on the Canterbury Bulldogs, who they did beat back in round 9, 20-18, in what was a stunning upset at the time, but has been the foundation for their big push into the finals with back-to-back wins in weeks 1 and 2 of the finals to put them in a position here after beating the Sharks and Panthers. So it's been a great journey for Shah Henry and her girls after some mid-season stumbles, and they've certainly used that Bulldogs game back in round 9 as a springboard to unveil their team identity and play some really, really solid football.
Just to add a bit of context as well for our listeners, John, when in the finals in defeating the Sharks and the Panthers, they actually reversed the games from earlier this season.
So we don't want that to be true this week, though. We don't want to reverse the result from round 9, but yes, big efforts from the girls, right? 60s to particularly. I don't know why you keep dropping out for me in Discord. Sorry. The Panthers game was the worst game they played in the season, and the Sharks game was the heaviest defeat they'd had. So that were two very important results to flip the script on. And again, it speaks to the growth in the team, sprouting from that round 9 victory against the Bulldogs, where they found a way to out-physical a big physical Bulldogs team, and playing that tough football really has been the focus of their game plans for the following 2 games.
Yes, John, as I'm just sort of playing with the microphone cord there, my apologies. Look, it's been they've struck form really at the right end of the season, because that period in the middle of the season where they just were right off their game, and it was almost like the Sharks punched a hole in their confidence in that defeat, which was their first defeat of the season. Then, as you mentioned, their game against the Panthers, I'm sure the girls wouldn't mind me saying it was their worst form of the season in that particular game. They showed that, first of all, they were much better than they were against the Sharks. And then secondly, they showed that form against the Panthers was just anomalous, and in the wrong way, anomalous. So what we've seen in the last 3 weeks has been, I think, the forwards really taking control of those games, where, they're, once they've got control of the middle, as you noted, they've got very good edge players, John. And what they've been able to do is it's like from unlocking those strengths, they're able to strike from anywhere. So you've got that threat, like actually from the middles, because we've seen the offloads that have created line breaks, or even tries, like from the middle forwards. We've seen the edge players just almost unstoppable, charging at the lines, especially from close range. They've created all sorts of havoc. And then, of course, that second phase play that they've generated has created that space out wide, and we saw them benefit from that space that was created with some of those tries out wide, which last week, which didn't make things easy for Aaliyah Scrivens with her goal kicking in her first week back from injury. But it was a measure of the fact that they were generating that opportunity and using the ball. So, John, I'm going to back the girls this week, because I think there's a real self-belief that's entered into the team. And I think you might have mentioned this before, I think they've found their identity as a team now. And each of the players really seems to understand their role within the team as well, and the importance of getting that job done. Probably, I think one of the players in this back end of the season has been Tess McWilliams.
Yes, she's been really good in the front row. Yeah,
I think she's been really underrated. And it's easy to talk about the strike that comes from someone like Rivalea Arlo, and I'm sure Rivalea features in the tip sheet from the opposition coaches on a weekly basis, because if they don't shut her down, then they're in almighty trouble, because she does a lot of damage with both her running game and her offloads. And she's got a real football sense about her. And then she's almost got a clone on the edge as well with Fontaine. I'm glad they wear different coloured headgear as well. It helps to if I'm not seeing the number on the player and I'm calling like I was from the distance that I had to call from at Parker Street Reserve, which was behind the dead ball line and in the corner. It helps to be able to identify the players from a distance. But anyway, John, look, so much to like about this team. I think they're getting great value off the bench, off the interchange bench as well. And
Alana O'Loughlin's had some huge stints off the interchange. We just mentioned Lilietta Pooley and her impact last week. Rory Muir is a very professional dummy half substitute there. And Manili Ava'e is a good foil to Taylor Falaniko, I think. Both of whom have had really nice impact moments. Taylor's had some big tries, actually. And ditto for Amani, who's been a big physical presence in the front row as part of our interchange. Look, the player that I thought was integral to that win against the Bulldogs in round 9 was Kylie Gray. She had a try and an offload, a ridiculous offload, to set up another try that really set the tone for the Parramatta Eels, and I think she's going to be important too. Although I don't think we've seen the best of her at 5'8", 60s. I think we're seeing nice flashes, but it's just that difficulty when you get put into an on-ball role, trying to make sure you're not being greedy and also getting the ball out to your teammates, but also being greedy when you need to be to take advantage of the right looks. So I'm hoping that she can have a big game here. But she could also just lean on Aaliyah Sifan to be more of the primary ball player too. Aaliyah is quite a good half. So I think that letting Kylie play her natural game will be crucial here for the Parramatta Eels.
And John, I just got a little bit distracted then, because people might see me occasionally just going and checking messages as they come through. And as you know, they tend to be a little bit non-stop. But I won't give away too much, but I'll have some good news for you about a guest that we will be chatting with. I would suggest in the next week or two. We'll just have to organise with him about when we can get him onto the podcast. But I'd like to organise that within the next week or two. So really looking forward to that. We'll just drop a little teaser there. Little teaser. Yeah. So, John, as I said, I am going to tip the girls to get this done and be advance to the grand final. I'm sure you're doing the same in that regard.
In terms of actual form, I think it is a coin flip game. You can't be disrespectful what the Bulldogs are going to bring to the table here.
No, not at all.
But when it's a coin flip game, you'd be crazy not to be backing your team, right? And you've got to be behind the girls here, giving them every bit of energy to get over the line. And like I said, their journey from where they were coming out of that bye, getting ambushed by the Sharks, stumbling against the Panthers, and how dire their outlook went from there to getting a huge win against the Bulldogs, which technically they didn't need to go into the finals, because we discussed the theoretical scenario there, how they would miss out, and it was an absurd 160-point swing of for and against, I think it was, across 2 games. So they weren't going to miss the finals. But the difference between beating the Bulldogs and coming into that game against Cronulla, that revenge game against the Sharks, with legit momentum and that identity that we talked about, and then being beaten by the Bulldogs, maybe even hammered, and limping into that game against the Sharks, it is everything. And the fact that they've done what they've done, that they're playing the kind of football that they are playing for 3 weeks now, going on the 4 into this game against the Dogs, they're every chance of getting into the grand final. And we'll obviously discuss a prospective matchup against a grand final opponent next week if it happens. But if they beat the Dogs, there's no reason to think they can't take it all.
Oh, yeah. It goes without saying that this is their biggest match of the season. Every match in the final series has been, because it's been potentially season ending to lose it. But this now, the goal for every team is to play in that grand final. And this really does mean a lot to the team. I'll be interested to see what tactics Shah comes up with for this week, because it's, as you said, this Bulldogs team is a quality outfit. They hadn't lost a game before they fell to the Eels in the final round. So that's a measure of how well the Eels were going to beat the Bulldogs, that they delivered their only loss of the season in that last regular round match at Kellyville. And what a great way to christen the new fields at Kellyville, to defeat the undefeated Bulldogs up there. So, we'll go with the win there, which now takes us to the minor premiers of the SG Ball, the Parramatta Eels, who had that surprising and disappointing loss to the Roosters in the very first week of the finals, and then really had to overcome a fired-up Melbourne Storm last week. They didn't have it all their own way by any stretch of the imagination.
The end scoring makes it a little bit more flattering than how close that game was because of that late try to Dom Ferrugia.
They were improved. They were certainly improved on the week before against the Roosters, but were they back to their best form? No, they weren't. And they will need to lift this week, and I'll let you take over with the running through the team list.
Yeah, the Parramatta Eels in action against the South Sydney Rabbitohs at Redfern Oval, 1:00 p.m. Sunday, as per the other two games, Bar TV and TCT for your coverage. Eels met the Rabbitohs back in, I believe, was it round 4 or round 5 Sixties, and they were down 16-0 before storming home to win, scoring, I think, 22 unanswered points. It was a very tense game, and the Bunnies TV boys, or Rabbitohs TVs, covered it and did actually a pretty good job, honestly. But for the Eels, coming off this win against the Melbourne Storm, they look like this. There is one change to the team, I believe, 60s on the bench, and we'll get to that at the end. But as per the program last week, Cameron Bamwood, who I thought had a good game at fullback and was one of the key factors in the Eels prevailing, he gets the one. Dom Ferrugia will be on the right sideline with Aiden Kaborian down the left. Joining Aiden down the left edge is Anders Johansson. Nathan Howard will be on the right. Lorenzo Talatona and Lincoln Fletcher are your halves pairing. Elijah Shane Tapa'u and Ryder Talangi start as the two bookends to Lachlan Koinakis at dummy half. Josiah Funarayuta will play on the right edge, although he did switch to the left late last game, 60s, as the Eels shuffled their bench into the game. Christopher Petrus starts on the left, Max Popo at lock forward. And you got Tom Summer, Wesley Picodi, and the one change here, Mark Williams coming into the team for Trace Beattie, who was not named anywhere, so maybe he picked up an injury or a suspension, 60s. And Isaac Jim on the last spot of the bench. Isaac did start last week, but maybe there's better balance to that front row rotation with Isaac coming from the interchange, with Bo Lucian and Larima Saukuru as your two reserve players. And the one change there, Mark Williams, who is a bigger body than Trace Beattie, so we'll give the Eels a bit more beef if they want to go that way through the middle. But nothing else changing for the Parramatta Eels beyond that one spot on the interchange as they look to punch a ticket to the grand final, taking on one of the better teams this year in the South Sydney Rabbitohs.
That is going to be a real test taking on the Rabbitohs. We got the decision against the Rabbitohs during the season, but John, if without an improvement on the first 2 weeks of the finals, that task is going to be pretty tough.
Yeah,
especially taking on the Rabbitohs at Redfern. I think it's been really rough that, and I know it doesn't work out this way in junior reps. However, we've seen teams get home finals matches, and a team that finished as minor premiers isn't able to secure a home finals match. Now, look, I know there's reasons around that as well, because it's my understanding that the fields at Kellyville haven't been available because of some seeding that was done there, and it might even be the same case out at Eric Tweedale Stadium.
And Leichhardt's obviously being used for the NRL with the West Tigers on Sunday, but they're St. Mary's. I don't know. It just feels like there are more established traditional venues that we've used that have been staples of the junior reps in years gone by that suddenly aren't available. So maybe there's something behind the scenes that we don't know. But
I think I've got a feeling that St Mary's wasn't available as well. So I don't think it's been by choice that they've avoided some of the what you'd have to consider would be better options, because certainly a field like Eric Tweedale Stadium was light years better than what we saw last week out at Penrith. Light years better. I mean, not only was there so much more seating is there so much more seating available at Eric Tweedale Stadium, but you've got cover, you've got I think the dressing sheds that can cover the switch over between the games. Anyway, it is what it is. So we've got this game on at Redfern. John, why haven't we been at our best, do you think, in these last 2 weeks of the season, of the final series?
I think, and again, we're out, even as informed as we are, having watched so much junior reps, we are outsiders looking in. So we're not privy to some of the key details in terms of team psychology and preparation that really give you the critical insight into why there might be hiccups or stumbles in a team. But from our position, not quite outside, but definitely not inside looking in, where the Eels have been rolling and playing some great football, some of the best football I've seen in the SG Ball 60s in our time covering it. I would put my money on it being a combination of finals football and just the tension, the ratcheting of the tension that comes up there, just getting inside their own head, because they've played so well for so long in this season that there is almost a burden of expectation upon themselves that they would go on and do the same job that they've done in the regular season. And that's
do you think there's been to that end, do you think there's been in their head they're thinking, don't make a mistake?
Yeah.
And then that's when mistakes happen.
And it could be manifesting in different ways, in a degree of complacency, which is opposite to what you're suggesting there, where because we've done it earlier this season, we should do it again now. Or like you said, maybe in a bit of burden and expectation where, we've been good, so we have to be good. We have to press the issue. We have to be dominant from the start. And instead, they've come against two teams, especially the Roosters, but also to the Melbourne Storm, who were ultra aggressive in the opening 10 minutes, like ultra aggressive, playing really up tempo, really pushing the envelope in terms of the referee's whistle, and looking to put the Eels on back foot and sort of cause them to trip over themselves on the back of early errors. And particularly against the Roosters, they struggled with that sort of onslaught from their opposition. We saw a number of bad mistakes under the high ball from the back three. We saw some pushed offloads from even players like Josiah Funaro-Yuta, who have been so consistent all year. And then the Roosters then piled on the pressure defensively, where they would hem the Eels inside their own 25, 30 metre mark, again, by really aggressively pushing the referee's interpretation of the offside, but they got away with it, and that's just good gamesmanship from the opposition. So I think it's that combination of the tension of the finals and maybe that psychological pressure that comes with it internally being met by two very willing teams in the Roosters and the Storm, who wanted to challenge the Eels physically. And the Eels need to be better in those opening exchanges. They need to be able to absorb those clashes and collisions and big moments in the first quarter of play, because you don't want to be chasing 2 or 3 tries the way they did against the Roosters and the way they could have done against the Storm, because they gave up first points. And it could have spiraled from there very easily if it wasn't for a good goal line stand that backed up that initial leaking of points. So, yeah.
I was just going to say, just to what you said, I think the Storm were literally following the Roosters' blueprint.
They definitely did their homework on what the Roosters did. I agree.
Especially, as you said, being ultra aggressive, pushing the envelope with the match officials in terms of the 10 metres, the time in the ruck, all those sorts of things, which, when you're talking about elite pathways football, you're also talking about referees' pathways. So the match officials at this level are a long way from the finished product. They're learning how to be match officials in controlling games where you've got players who are learning to be professional rugby league players. So if you've got a team which maybe, pushes things just a little bit more than usual, it might be a good chance to get away with it. And I think the Eels have to be guarded against that. I mean, I'm not necessarily talking about, tit for tat in the way that they play, but they have to realise that their opponents the last couple of weeks have been the aggressors.
Yep.
And I think we responded a bit better against the Storm, settled down in that first half after barely getting out of the Eels barely got out of their own half in that first 15, 20 minutes of the game. Like, they were anchored there by virtue of their errors and that domination of possession by the Storm. But as soon as they got into their groove, they just went bang, bang, bang with tries before half time. And that turned out, that became instrumental in getting the win, because that second half gave us some rather tense moments as the Storm came charging back. And where did they come charging back? They came tearing through the middle again. They just lifted their tempo. They lifted their aggression. They had some really aggressive defensive sets, keep pinning the Eels down towards their own end. That period of time where the Storm charged back, it was almost like that. It was almost a mirror reflection of the start of the game, where the Eels couldn't get out of their half. And so I think it's a matter of, we want to start better this week. We don't want Souths to dictate terms. They just got to make sure that their opponents don't dictate terms. They have to be the ones taking the ascendancy early and going on with it. So have we got the team to do that? Well, they're not minor premiers for nothing. I mean, it's a team that's absolutely laden with a talent riches. How many go on and play NRL? Well, that's from an individual basis a long way from being determined, because there's a lot of things that go into whether a player goes from being an elite pathways player through to being having a career in the NRL. And there's a lot of that into they have to work out their level of commitment that they have, their resilience that they have, the talent. The talent difference is minimal between a player that's a star pathways player and a player that goes on to have an NRL career. The talent level's not very different. It's all the intangibles that start to come into it. Their work ethic, their willingness to make sacrifices outside of football for football. Obviously they want a balanced life. They want education, all that sort of stuff. Their careers, they want to set all that up. But it may well be that, you don't go out with your friends as much. You certainly don't go drinking and carrying on. All those sorts of sacrifices that players make determine whether they're going to be an NRL player or not. But the talent is certainly there with this group, John. And we almost expect that they play in the grand final this year, but they can't have that expectation, I don't think. They have to understand this is going to be a big ask this week against the Rabbitohs, who are a strong team in their own right. So I think they're building back up again. It was a horrible game in the first week of the finals. It was a step up this last week. I think it'll be a step up this week, and who knows, it might then be leading to a peak in the grand final. They still have to make that step up again this week. I think they will. I think they're going to do it on the back of the forwards. We know what our spine is like. The spine is probably the best spine in this grade in the SG ball. But they're not going to win the game unless the forwards get their job done. And I think, they've got close to the best pack, if not the best pack in the competition. So, John, I'm going to tip a win. But, I also say it's not going to be a cakewalk. So, any last words you have on that before we hit the senior grades?
Yeah, I largely agree. I will say that the forward pack absolutely have to lay a platform here. They can't allow themselves to get rolled through the ruck. It just spirals the game out of control so quickly. And then I will level a challenge to a couple of players because they've been so good throughout the majority of the year, but I feel that that two of their contemporaries in the spine have outplayed them in the last couple of weeks. I think Aiden Kaburian's been really good across the first two finals game 60s, even that loss to the Roosters. While I thought that Cameron Bamblett was excellent against the Storm and was one of the key factors in how we got home. And it's not to say that Lorenzo Talatona and Lincoln Fletcher have played bad in that window. They'll obviously the entire team got rattled against the Roosters, and there was moments of nice play against the Storm. But I want them to take this game by the scruff of the neck 60s, and it's going to require the forwards to do their part too. Don't get me wrong; they can't make the tough carries to set the platform and then play from that platform. The two halves there. But this is a game where I really want Lorenzo and Lincoln to take control and play the bunnies off the park with their combination of kicking, running, and passing.
Yeah. Look, probably the most competitive bloke out there on the field is Lockie Kanikis. He would have been fuming at that loss in the first week of the finals. I'm sure that he's going to be instrumental in improved efforts of the spine this week because, again, it's not that the spine had poor games. They didn't have poor games in those contests. It's just that they weren't able to be as instrumental as they have been.
The standard that both they have for themselves and that we as fans watching them have set for them, it is very high. Like that's the reality, isn't it? Is that we've seen so many outstanding plays so consistently from those four players, in particular the 6 and the 7, where we sort of hold them to a very high standard. And I think that this is a game for them to take control, to reestablish their best form, and then A, get the Eagles through to the grand final, and B, come into that grand final, like you said, peaking and in red hot form 60s.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so now we get to the Jersey Flegg match this weekend.
Yes, also taking place at Redfern Oval, but on a different day as part of a doubleheader with the New South Wales Cup. 11:45 a.m. kickoff, Redfern Oval for the Parramatta Eels, who come into this round in third place, I believe, taking on the South Sydney Rabbitohs. And I think the Rabbitohs, in one grade, they're mid-table. In one grade, they're bottom of the table. And in the Flegg, they are mid-table. So they come into this one 10th with 2 wins and 5 losses. The Parramatta's 5 wins and 1 loss. And the Eels coming off the back of that revenge game against the Tigers 60s, looking to beat the Bunnies of a team that has at least one change because of the injury to Arpa Twiddle, with Jaden Mbichi coming into his number 1 role there, taking over the custodial duties for the backline. Muhammad Alamuddin and Bradley Avery are on the wings. Tavaka Palu and Richard Penasini rounding out an unchanged 2 to 5. Very settled there in the back line for the Parramatta Eels. Matty Hunter is now, okay, so we mentioned this on Teamless Tuesday. Cooper Fuller was named at the 7, but is now being amended to Joshua Lynn. So Matty Hunter partnering Joshua Lynn. And what I would suggest is Parramatta's front line halves pairing their 60s. They've been very good, both independently and together, Hunter and Lynn. In the front row, you got Damascus Nemia, Jack Hudson, and Tiankan Brown. Again, the premier choices there for the front row. Domenico Destradis, or Dom, back on his left edge after doing an emergency job filling in at right centre last week, and he's opposing Tyrese Lakini on the other side of the field. Seb Piacala gets the start at lock forward. On the interchange, you got Paddy Spence as the utility, Raf Destradis as the back row / backline utility as well, alongside his brother Dom, being able to cover those multiple spots. And then we got our first look at Will Lewis this year. Good to see Will getting a chance in the Flegg. And then Yeti Samuelu, who I had as probably the best on field for the Eels last week, 60s, and been something of a revelation since getting picked up from the Warriors this year, being a real physical firebrand for Jordan Rankin off the interchange. He rounds out their bench. Javan Stevenson-Halla is the 18th man, and a bit of beef there for the Eels in that concussion sub role.
John, how many middles have we got on the bench there?
Well, I would suggest Yeti is the only out-and-out middle. You've got Will Lewis, who last we saw was an edge-back rower, but again, tall and rangy. If he's grown onto his body a bit, a la Sean Lane, he might be able to play or cover the middle. Tyrese Lakini's played lock forward before, so you could throw him into the rotation if you want to do a roundabout substitute. And God knows Don Destratus and Raf Destratus will give you the all if you throw them into the ruck. But yeah, they do look skinny on middles as per program. But they've also got a couple of starting props in Nemia and Brown who can play big minutes. We've seen them be leveraged for pretty healthy stints. I think Brown played the entire first half against the West Tigers back in round 2 when they first met, and had a great stint there in the first half. So I don't know. You could put Seb Piacala into the middle rotation, like the front row rotation, and start someone else at lock forward as well. But
Like Paddy could play.
Paddy could play that lock and then throw Seb into the front row. But yeah, as per what we know, like I said, unless William Lewis has made a positional transition, they do look a little bit light in the middle.
Yeah, I don't know that I have seen Will at the games, and I don't think he's yet a middle, but I could be wrong.
He hasn't put on 15 kilos since we last saw him to cover that transition? No, okay.
No,
what a shock.
And I don't know, Yeti struck me as someone as being a middle who could play edge, or maybe an edge who could play middle. He sort of seems like someone who could go between those roles. That's why I was asking how many pure middles are actually there. So I don't know whether this is a tactical selection by Jordan Rankin, or if it's reflective of maybe an injury issue that we have, or player availability, because I have to think back now. Who's in the New South Wales Cup this week?
Saxon
been playing. So Saxon, yeah.
Because Tyree spent a couple of weeks up there, but he's obviously back in Flegg. Saxon is the only major Flegg eligible player up in Cup right now, or Raz Namba too, but he is obviously in the back line. So
yeah, okay. I wasn't sure about that, but definitely Saxon there. So I don't know what the injury situation is. I don't know whether that's a tactical selection choice, but it's just an interesting lineup that's there on the interchange for the Jersey Flegg. What we do know is they're getting plenty right out there on the field this year.
Yeah.
And maybe it's that extra mobility that's there as well. But, John, there's, it's interesting when you see, the Josh Lynn come back from New South Wales Cup and play Jersey Flegg, because he looks like a player who's from the grade above, who's dropping back. Well, I
agree. He definitely looks like a playmaker that has more time on his hands than what the opposition do, and is able to dissect the opposition more consistently because of it.
Yes.
Lynn was part of that 23 SG Ball premiership winning squad, and he probably was not the most heralded member of that spine, which obviously had other NRL debutants in Sanders, Arthur, and Arthur hasn't obviously debuted NRL, but he's obviously held in a similar regard to Lynn. But both Arthur and Josh have just gone about their development really solidly since then. And they've
really benefited from a pre-season with the NRL.
Agreed. And then time in the New South Wales Cup, which they've then used to enhance their ability to play at the Flegg level. And Lynn, I agree, he's looked a cut above the Flegg. But by virtue of who's ahead of him in the Cup, he's sort of been relegated is not the right word, because you can come back here and shine and make a great name for yourself. But he finds himself in the Jersey Flegg because he's got Dean Hawkins and Ronald Volkman ahead of him in the Cup level.
Yeah, and that's probably a predicament that the club is happy to be in when they have to find where they can fit the players.
Healthy pathway. That's exactly what you want. You obviously not going to always have an embarrassment of riches at every grade, but you would like having clear, like tiered development between the flag and the cup, and having options at both levels that you can use to enhance both teams.
Yeah, absolutely. So just having a bit of a look at the ladder of the Jersey flag, the Rabbitohs they're sitting way down in 10th place. The Eels in 3rd place with a game in hand. I haven't really seen too much of the Rabbitohs at all this year, John. So I can't comment on the strengths of individual players. You'd have to back the Eels in this just based on what they've been producing on a weekly basis, where their only loss that they had this year was against the West Tigers, and last weekend they were able to reverse that result. And I did talk about the other night in our news podcast that it was unusual that both West Tigers games ended up being such high-scoring games when the Eels are far and away the best offensive team in this competition. To end up conceding the sort of points that they have, first in a loss and then even in the victory. What was it, about 26 points or something like
26
that?
points last week.
Yeah. So just really unusual that it has panned out that way. But I know I keep harping on about it, but the difference between last year and this year in terms of the start to the season really has provided the platform for the Eels to be able to go on with it in Jersey flag. And last year, whereas they were waiting for reinforcements from the SG Ball team to arrive and take the pressure off some of the like they were riddled with injury last year. This year, any SG Ball players that are elevated, and there will be SG Ball players elevated, will simply be adding a bit of cream to the team this year. So, John, have to tip the Eels in this one. They're just functioning really well as a team. Look, Arpa's a big loss. Whether he's out injured, as it is this week, or on the occasions where he's elevated to New South Wales Cup, he's a loss. But the Eels have had to do it without him before. So, I think they'll be able to do it this week. They've got great confidence in the team and how they're playing.
The only concern would be playing down to your opposition, which is not uncommon at the NRL level, let alone the Jersey flag level. So you don't want to see the Eels getting a little bit overconfident, too brash, too reckless with the ball in hand. If they just get through their fundamentals, I think they can put on a pretty good score here.
Yeah, John, just before we wrap that up, I had a question put to me on Instagram as to whether I thought that players like Damascus and Tiankum future NRL players as middles. How do you see their prospects?
It's a good question because obviously it's a position of need for the Eels when you're looking at succession planning. There's definitely some opportunities for young bulls to come through and stake a claim in that middle rotation in the coming seasons ahead. I would say that and it's always, we do stress it is difficult to evaluate players and to put a grading, if you will, on them as an NRL prospect, because sometimes you'll see a guy that just, he's made for first grade. We've spoken about in the past, Dylan Brown, Will Penasini, guys like that, they just completely crush these grades and you have no doubt that they're going to be bound for the NRL. There are a lot of guys where there is high variance where you think that at their best they could definitely be NRL players, but if there isn't quite that right pathway step or they don't find the right timing, they might not be there. What I will say about Damascus and Tiankum is that what I'm seeing for them this year is two guys that with hard work, the right opportunity and the right coaching, I think there is a reasonable chance they can be part of an NRL rotation in the middle. We're seeing two guys with big engines, with big impact. They're willing to put in on the defensive side of the ball, which is huge. They've got a bit of ball playing as well, second phase ability. It's just two well-rounded prospects. And while neither are a young Junior Barlow or a young Sam Tulavati who were for Junior, it was he woke up in what was then the Toyota Cup, wasn't it, 60s? Back in the day, he had just like the light bulb switched on for him at 19 years of age, and he just became a monster overnight. But Sam was consistently dominant at every level the juniors were seeing. These two have been more steady in their development, but again, that's not to say that they can't go further. And I think what we're seeing underneath the tutelage of Jordan Rankin is two young bookends that are willing to learn, are willing to work, and have some impact. And that is a great foundation for guys that will go into the New South Wales Cup and maybe spend a year there, or maybe even two, depending on how much they need in the oven from a football perspective, and could be part of the NRL rotation for the Eels beyond that.
Yeah, my response was I'd expect them to get a taste of New South Wales Cup this year,
yep.
possibly a pre-season, an NRL pre-season going into next year. The goal of that NRL pre-season, whether it be a part pre-season or a whole pre-season, really being about preparing them for maybe a full season of New South Wales Cup next year. So I just thought I'd put that to you.
The general rule from 260s is that it's not true for every player, because some young players just hit the ground running, but you'd want 2 or 3 NRL pre-seasons under your belt before being considered a genuine first grader. That's the sort of workload that you need to be able to balance yourself through the challenges that face you as a young player, and the attrition, I suppose, or preparation for the attrition that you need to beat into your body. So that's not to say that they couldn't be contributors in the NRL after that first proper preseason, but that's just a timeline for fans to be aware of. Yeah,
absolutely. You always get outliers in that regard. Dylan Brown was an outlier. Riley Smith at the moment has been an outlier. Back in the day, Reid Marnie was an outlier. Where they come in for their first pre-season and the coaches go, "What have we got here?
Yep.
What have we got here?" And a coach can't deny their place in the team. But yes, even players like that, however, who are able to quickly advance to the NRL, their development is still happening, and that is an obvious thing. But part of that development is getting those number of pre-seasons behind them. And you speak to a lot of seasoned NRL players, and they tell you they don't even develop their NRL physique for 3 to 4. They need about 3 to 4 pre-seasons behind them before they've actually even got their physique, their ideal NRL physique. So anyway, John, that now brings us to the final match for our preview, which is the New South Wales Cup match, also at Redfern, also against the South Sydney Rabbitohs.
Yes, Eels coming to this one on the back of a solid win over the Western Suburbs Magpies, 22-10, I believe it was, 60s. It was a similar story to that game against the Raiders, except the second half defense against the Magpies was much better. So they didn't score a point, but they also weren't challenged by the same token. And their team looks like this. At fullback, you got Josh Papawi. On the wings, making his return after a week off, is Hayes Dunster, so a big boost to that right sideline. On the opposite flank, Samuel Luizu pushes across to replace Alfred Smalley, who, in our chat with AJ on the news podcast, suggested there could be a hamstring issue there for Alfred, putting him out of the contention for selection this week. In the centres, Jordan Samrani and Araz Namva will reprise their roles. Araz scored a try down the left side with a nice little angled run, while Jordan Samrani had another huge game, 226 metres, and a tipped try assist kick. He went up and tapped it back down the Bryce Cartwright. So he had a great game there. Halves pairing is Ronald Volkman and Dean Hawkins, obviously the Eels' first choice pairing for this grade. In the front row, getting a start this week is Wiremu Greg and Tony Matayeli. with Brendan Hands out for what we assume is going to be at least a month, maybe a little bit longer. PCL's not the worst knee injury to do 60s, but they tend to attract that 4 to 6 week recovery window. So replacing Brendan this week is Cruz Natilli Schmidt. Cruz has been quite handy in this grade this season and gets a chance now to stake a greater claim of playing time. In the back row, you've got Bryce Cartwright and Dan Keir, the captain. Moving into the lock role this week after playing in the front row is Ryan Madison. On the bench as the utility dummy half, it's Manny Luke, joined by Saxon Pryke, Brock Parker, and Kane Kalachi there, rounding out the rotation. Trio of young forwards there in Saxon, Brock, and Kane, who've all been pretty handy this year, so nice bench pack there, 60s. Taking on the Bunnies, who started the season with a win and has since lost 6 straight to be ranked last in the New South Wales Cup. But even so...
Who did they beat in that first week,
I actually
John?
had that up here. They beat Manly, believe it or not, the team that beat the Parramatta Eels out at Four Pines, 22-20, so close game. But bearing in mind all those numbers, 60s, this is still a team that features Joshua Schuster and Lewis Dodd in the halves, so a mixture of explosive ability and seasoned ESL or English Super League experience there. And they've got Max Lehman on the wing, who was a flyer from Manly. We've seen him in the junior reps in the years gone by. Liam LeBlanc, I know, is a pathways player for the Rabbitohs. So they've got some players that you've got to be considerate of, but I think the Eels do have the favourable matchups across the park here.
Yeah, the Eels have obviously lost some strike power with the departures of Joe Offengowie and departure of Joe Offengowie and the time away from the game that Sean Lane has taken, which naturally means that if they weren't playing in New South Wales Cup, which they were last named to do, then at the very least players who've taken their spots in first grade might have been playing back in Cup if they were still, playing in first grade, those departing players. So the Eels still name a very strong pack. And I mean, you look at blokes like Woody, Bryce Cartwright, Dan Keir, Ryan Madison, they're all experienced first grade players. Then you've got, of course, Ronald Volkman and Dean Hawkins in the halves. Jordan Samrani, who made a great debut this year for the Eels, and Hayes Dunster, who he's been on that comeback trail, but I thought his form's been as good as it's been right up the standard that he was playing at when he was playing NRL. Now, he's not playing NRL, so the opposition isn't quite the same, but he's doing the things that we saw of Hayes Dunster. He now looks like Hayes Dunster playing. When he's been struggling the last few years, he hasn't looked like Hayes Dunster. He'd looked to be during the last couple of years struggling with getting anywhere near his normal pace, struggling to beat defenders. Right now, he looks like he's playing full of confidence as well.
Agreed.
And when he's getting the ball in that quarter line with maybe only a player or two in front of him, like his opposites, you're backing him to get past his opponents to score. So what that means for him going forward, we don't know. But he's doing everything that he needs to do right now to continue his rugby league career, because the way things were heading was not good for Hayes. If it was just an outrageous injury that he had, the worst possible knee injury you could ever imagine. So to be able to now look like he's moving past that and showing what he's showing, you'd think to yourself, okay, there is a future for Hayes still. And he's still young enough. What is he, about 24, 25?
I was actually just thinking that as you were talking. Let me just pull up his DOB. He just turned 26. So
just turned
fraction on what you're suggesting, but still got a good 4 or 5 years of career span feasibly in him. So, yeah, this has been an important arc for him, 60s. Like you said, it has been beyond miserable the pile-on of bad luck since Tyrell Fulmiano did that hip drop tackle, the original hip drop that sparked the entire crackdown and controversy. I feel like that was tackle zero, and he has just been dogged by follow-up injury and horrific luck, and he's finally, like you said, resembling the player that was there, 4 years ago now? Is that how long it's been?
Yeah, you lose track of the years, don't you?
Because his breakout year was when Michael Jennings got the drug test.
Yes. So what was that, 2020?
2020. 5 years. Like, well, going into the 5th year now. Like, oh my goodness.
Yes. Yeah, that was when he got his debut game in that first year of COVID.
Yeah.
Where he was in the bubble, did nothing but train all year, and probably looked like he wasn't going to get to play a game of football, but got called up for that game. So his first and only game of the year was that finals match where he did particularly well. Then, of course, the next year he was the rookie of the year.
Yes,
and
he finished that
season
averaging damn near 200 metres a game in the final couple of months. He had a huge run at the end of that season, which had fans really, understandably believing that they had to position the backline under lock and key. And then obviously the preseason happens and that game against the Dragons happens. So it is just such a great story to see Hayes getting back to his best. And
3 years in the wilderness, basically.
Yeah, crazy.
22, 23, 24.
Crazy. So great to see Hayes back to anything near his best. He's been a big factor for the Parramatta Eels. And yeah, there's no doubt he makes this cup team a lot stronger with his presence down that right sideline.
Yeah. So, look, probably the interesting thing about this team is that both dummy half options sit outside the Eels' top 30 and development list because we have two dummy halves who are on the injury list. And this is why, clubs have to look at their depth charts and their signings in certain key positions because, as we well remember, we only have to go back to that final series back in, 21, where Ray Stone had to play a dummy half. So we had three dummy halves out of action when we got to week 2 of the finals that particular year. Right now, we've got two dummy halves out of action. So we have two players who are, would have started the season running around in non-Massey Cup. And one's a starter, one's on the bench.
And the dummy half we have healthy was a guy that wasn't even in the top 30 or a depth squad spot to start the preseason. Riley Smith is, by virtue of his hard work, is now the number one guy, but he wasn't actually part of that forecasted roster depth initially. So, yeah, and look, I will say, Sixties, that once Riley was upgraded, 3 dummy halves inside your top 30, it's a little bit under 10% because you have the dev slots, don't get me wrong. But from a top 30 perspective, it's 10% of your allocation there. It's not an outrageous or a poor amount of depth to have at that spot. Just, geez, when the injuries pile onto that one position, you feel the sting so quickly. And we're probably looking at getting Hands and Lussick back at a similar time. I think Joey Lussick is around 11 or 12 with the thumb surgery he had. And Hands, given that it happened in round 7, you put a 4 to 5 week timer on that. And again, that falls in that round 11 to 12 window. So there is a precarious window for the NRL team to now navigate. And equally for the New South Wales Cup, they're now calling on young Cruz, who's been quite good for him. Cruz has been very solid working as that relief dummy half already. But they've turned back to Manny Luke, who again has been a very capable option for the Eels in the last 12 to 15 months, I want to say, given that we're a bit into this year as well. So, yeah, they've got guys there. But if anything else happens now, it's going to be a very nervous situation for both Kawas and Riles to navigate. But equally...
Well, you'd think... Well, it might be a Jersey flag elevation.
Yeah, well, I've been banging the table for Jack Hudson to be part of that cup consideration down the road, 60s. This would be an acceleration of that timeline because ideally you'd have the SG Ball wrap up as the Eels hopefully being premiers, but finishing their campaign in the coming weeks. Give yourself a week or two to then incorporate those young players, and Lachlan Koinakis comes into the flag team to work alongside Paddy Spence in that role, allowing Jack Hudson to step up, but injuries may force our hands sooner, at least for Jack Hudson. So still, a big opportunity for Cruz in particular, his 60s, to carve out a place in this cup team, and keen to see what he can do.
Yeah. So, John, look, you look at this, to me, on paper, this is a mismatch between the Eels and the Rabbitohs. The respective table positions say that it's a mismatch. We know that it doesn't always work out that way, especially if you've got a couple of quality players that are in the Rabbitohs team in their halves. Who knows? They could just come out on fire, those particular players, and inspire something from the team. We saw from the Eels against Manly that it can go horribly wrong in a game.
And Lord knows that Josh Schuster loves a fancy play against the Eels. He loves a successful chip kick or two against our team, so that could be on the cards here.
He does, but John, in that game against Manly, I thought there was a collection of ordinary performances from individuals in the Eels team, which of course then just culminated in a poor match right across the board for the Eels. It was, as it's turned out, it's an outlier of a game. Yeah. Now, can Parramatta play better than what they have been at? Absolutely, because even against I'm trying to think, it was the Raiders game a couple of weeks ago, was the second half was almost diabolical.
Yes, the second half fade was very alarming. But like I said, it was same but different the week after, where against the Western Suburbs, they had the dominant first half into a relatively scoreless second half against Canberra. They got a penalty goal, which was important, but there was no points in the second half against the Western Suburbs, but the way they played was completely different. It was a real emphasis on defense, real physicality and chasing those collisions, and that's why, even though they conceded the only try of the half, it felt like they were in a much better place for the team.
Yep. So, look, I'm tipping the Eels to win comfortably in this one.
They should.
John,
they
any
really
different?
Should. Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see who can star. Jordan Samrani, his numbers have been outstanding. He's averaging over 200 metres a game, 60s. But likewise, Josh Papawi's been electric. Hayes Dunster, we mentioned him already. The halves. I think the player I'm looking at right now, in lieu of that Daily Telegraph article that intimated a potential contract extension, I think it's go time for Tony Mattielli, 60s. He's been good. Like he has not been bad by any measure this year. I think with the chance to start this week, he can really put his name forwards with the Eels on a bye in the NRL, and maybe looking to reevaluate their middle forward depth with how the roster's sort of shaking out with the departures and leaves of absences being granted right now. Yeah,
look, he had a very good pre-season. There's been talk about the Eels doing a new deal with him.
Mm-hmm.
So a contract going forward. Hopefully we see not just this good game that he's been providing each week, but maybe just take it up just that little notch to have them consider him for an NRL debut at some time soon.
Yep.
Okay, John, that just about finishes up our 5-game preview for the Eels. So although there's no Eels NRL action, there's no shortage of action across the board for our mighty Eels. Again, thank you for today. Thank you for our listeners watching this on delay, not being live, of course, with our preview podcast, as we record it during the day to put out a little bit later. Thank you to our sponsors, Star Partners Real Estate, Auburn, Narellan and Parramatta, and also Parramatta Leagues Club. Don't forget, you can also support us as individuals through Patreon. There's a link on our homepage and at the bottom of our articles. So you just have to hit the link and you can, that'll take you through to signing up for Patreon. And of course, whatever platform you're watching this on or listening on, if you can give it a like or subscribe, that would be fantastic. Again, thank you for listening. John, as always say, go you mighty Eels.
Yes, well done.